Welcome back. Frank Lloyd Wright's Martin House is celebrating the women who inhabited its halls with the upcoming exhibit, The Space She Keeps. And I'm joined now by Executive Director Jessie Fisher to tell us more about it. Welcome, Jessie. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. I'd love you to start off by just talking about the Frank Lloyd Wright Martin House and what it is, what makes it such an iconic landmark in the Queen City.
Sure. Well, the Martin House was designed in 1905 by Frank Lloyd Wright, who is probably America's most important architect. He'd want me to tell you who's the most important architect in the world, but certainly one of the most important American architects, one of the only architects who has UNESCO World Heritage listing entirely to himself. And the Martins commissioned him to build this house in Buffalo when he was relatively unknown. So they really took a chance, and Darwin Martin remained probably his most important patron for his entire life. Frank Lloyd Wright was a notoriously terrible businessman, and Darwin Martin really propped up a huge amount of his career, and it's very likely we wouldn't have things like the Guggenheim and Falling Water if it weren't for the Martins' steadfast patronage of their friend Frank Lloyd Wright.
Wow, okay. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the exhibit that we can come out to see starting on Friday.
Sure. Well, when you come to the Martin House for a tour, there's a lot going on, and so we typically focus a lot on Frank Lloyd Wright, on Darwin Martin, on that relationship, but there were so many other interesting stories at this house, and so the exhibit really gives us an opportunity to do a deep dive into some of the most important people of the house, which is the women who lived and who worked there. So we have Isabel Martin, who is really interesting, fascinating person, a patron of the arts in Buffalo, really did a lot to encourage other women to read. They read Jane Addams' Hull House and really thought about what was the role of women in society, especially at that time. There's a really interesting part of the exhibit that's actually based on the women's suffrage movement. The Martins were trying to decide how they felt about this, so they went to and they hosted a lot of lectures, both pro and against. I think that's hard for us to think about, but it was definitely a new concept. It was not something that had happened too much around the world, and women were really fighting hard for the right to vote, and ultimately the Martin women did decide to support suffrage, and so there's a really interesting component of the exhibition that talks about how women in general across the city of Buffalo were thinking about suffrage and how the Martins were in that movement.
Very, very cool. Let's talk a little bit more about what we can expect to see, the people and the objects that will also be on display.
Sure. Well, most of these objects have actually never been seen before, so they've been a part of our collection, and we are bringing them out. We have some amazing clothing, some dresses that haven't been seen before. The Martin family were sort of really remarkable diarists, so we actually have their diaries will be out on display, which gives you just such an interesting window into their lives, a lot of the books that they read, some of the art and media that they consumed. We actually will have home movies that the Martins themselves shot, very early home movies, so those will be playing for people to come and take a look at. And then I think one of the things that is most interesting about the exhibition is we didn't just want to focus on Isabel and her daughter Dorothy, who are these incredibly interesting and educated women, but we wanted to think about the women who worked in the Martin House and around the Martin House, and how they contributed to the community and to the lives of people in Buffalo. And so we do have a lot of components of this exhibition that are also about people like Louise Mueller, who was a photographer here in Buffalo at the turn of the last century. She had her own business. She had a storefront on Elmwood Avenue, and she, she made her way in the world in a time when that was not necessarily expected. So there's a lot about how women were in the city of Buffalo at that time.
How long will this exhibit be on display?
The exhibit opens on Friday, on Valentine's Day, so if you're looking for a fun activity, and it runs through June 2nd. Our exhibitions are always free for our members, and if you buy a tour ticket, the exhibition is included in the price of your tour ticket. And on Saturday and Sundays coming up from through March, April, and May, we also have our Women of the Martin House tour, so you can come take a tour and then spend some extra time in the exhibition as well. Nice. And we are participating in Free Fridays every fourth Friday of the month, so we're open from 12 to 8 on Fridays, so it's a great opportunity to come on down and see the exhibition.
Very, very cool. Okay. Where do people go for their tickets?
You can go to martinhouse.org, very simple, and sign up. You can also just drop right by the Barton House, the Delta Barton House. Delta Barton was Darwin Darwin Martin's sister. And the very first house that Frank Lloyd Wright designed in Buffalo, actually, Darwin had commissioned for his sister Delta and her husband George.
Oh, wow.
And that's where the exhibition is being held, which is also a really fascinating component of the exhibition because you're in the spaces where a lot of these objects would have been from. But you can just drop right by the Barton House from 12 to 4. Thursday through Monday, anytime between now and June, and come check out the exhibition.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and sharing more about it. It's a really cool idea. We obviously know that Frank Lloyd Wright and Martin House has a long-standing history in Buffalo, but you're taking a new spin and a new outlook on it. And I love that it's opening on Valentine's Day, because that's a great thing for couples to do, stay educated, have something to talk about.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, viewers, this exhibit is opening on Friday and runs until June. You can learn more about it by visiting martinhouse.org.